right, guys, we're just going to get right into it. So deeper than the data. But first, what we've got to talk about is there's a lot of different tests. You know, we look up here, and here's some pictures from the combine. We've got the standing long jump, a seated med ball throw, which probably wasn't from the combine, the L drill or the three cone, the 2 vertical jumps I put on there. Why? Because they both look cool. I like the vertical jump. I don't know. Wind gate. There's plenty of tests, and each one of us tell us something different. Now, there's some major questions that you've got to ask yourself when we're dealing with testing is, why do you test? Why are you testing? If you don't have an answer as to why, just get rid of it. What do you test? What's going to be appropriate? What do the numbers mean? And most importantly, though, what can the numbers mean? And this is where we're really going to get into it. This is what we can get a lot more information out of things. But let's go through the basics, and then we'll go deep. So why do you test? Well, are for assessment of athletic talent. And depending on the level that you're at, sometimes it will help you guide the athlete to where they need to go. Sometimes athletic talent, it may just be simply anthropometric. Hey, dude, you're 7 foot tall. You don't have to move. Just stand under the basket and put it in. Sometimes it's looking at things like speed, jumping ability to change direction, ability to do something for the sport. Maybe it's catch. Maybe somebody can run a 4.2 40, but if the ball comes at them, or if they try and change direction, they can't do it. Guess what? Football probably ain't your sport, but hey, man, let's go over to the track team. You're looking at things like that. Some other reasons for testing would be identification of physical abilities in need of improvement. Maybe they're extremely strong, but they're not very explosive. Maybe they're extremely fast, but they can't change direction. So testing will help you know what does that athlete need to do to improve in his sport. And also there's the charting of the progress over an athletic career. This is going to allow the athlete to, it really garners buy-in. They see, I came in here as a freshman, here I am as a junior, I've gotten 0.3 of a second faster in my sprint time, a 0.5 a second faster on my agility, and my vertical jump went up 4 inches, 10 centimeters. Got the UK guy up here. I got to make sure we're all on the same page. So we've got to make sure that we're looking at things like that. So what do you test? There's a lot of them, right? There's the strength, the speed, the agility, the conditioning tests, the combine tests. And I know that recently people have been talking about, like with the NFL combine, they're not applicable, they're not applicable, they're not applicable. Well, guess what, guys? If you can add extra zeros behind your name because you can do the combine test really well, guess what your athletes should be able to do? Be good at the combine tests. Some of the things we've got to look at, and this is straight out of Essentials 3. So sorry, Greg, I didn't pull E4 on this. Metabolic energy system specificity. Make sure that it is the appropriate energy system. Biomechanical movement pattern specificity. Experience and training status, age and sex, and environmental factors. So for the metabolic energy system specificity, what are we talking about here? Well, basically, you got to make sure that if your sport is using that energy system, that's the one that you're looking at. So let's take the sport of American football, for instance. The typical play lasts 6 seconds. You might have anywhere between 20 and 45 seconds in between. So we're looking at an alactic sport. Some people are going to say anaerobic, but anaerobic can cover anything under than, like what, 1 minute? Something about that of activity. We're looking at 6 seconds. That is not just anaerobic, it is alactic. We're looking at the phosphocreatine energy system for that individual play. So if we're looking at a test for football, a conditioning test, a lot of people like the 300-yard shuttle. Well, what is the 300-yard shuttle? How long does it take to complete each repetition? About a minute, right? It takes about a minute. What energy system is that? Pure lactic. Pure lactic. So if we're looking at a sport that is aerobic and alactic, aerobic because they're recovering in between each repetition, each play, using that aerobic energy system to clear all of the metabolic byproducts and restore ATP. Why then would we look at a test that isn't specific to it from an energy system standpoint? So it's essentially an invalid test for that sport. Not that it's an invalid test overall, not that it's even a bad test, and is it a bad thing to be able to know how lactic your guys can go? Maybe it's an 18-play drive with a 2-minute, within the last 2 minutes of the game. Yes, with that little bit of rest, they are going to be producing lactate. They absolutely are. How often will that happen over the course of a season? Not very. Biomechanical movement pattern specificity. Okay, this goes back to transfer of trainness that we see from the Essentials of Strength and Conditioning. We hear about from Yuri Verkhoshansky, from Anatoly Bondarchuk, from those guys, the transfer of trainness. You've got to have the test is to the movement that is being done, the better. So what we're trying to say here is if we're looking at sprinters, we probably ought to be looking at squats, jumps, things like that. Looking at a overhead press or a lat pull down, 1 RM, there's no specificity there. So let's make sure that we're paying attention to the things that matter. For a test to be valid, it must emulate the energy requirements and important movements of the sport for which the ability is being tested. Okay? Don't waste your time doing tests just to do tests. Make sure that it is a valid test for the sport. Don't waste your time. We as coaches work way too many hours as it is. We are under tremendous time constraints from our different governing bodies, the NCAA, different high school organizations, different professional organizations. We don't have time to mess around. If it isn't valid, get rid of it. Looking at the tests, you've got to think about the experience and the training status of the athlete. What is their ability to perform the technique? If you got an athlete who's coming in for the first time, they've never lifted weights before, is it a good idea to do a clean 1 RM on them? No. You have somebody who's transfers to your program, coming from a traditional high-intensity training program where they're doing machines for 1 minute. Is it going to be appropriate to test that person on a squat and a clean, even though they've been lifting for 4 years? Which, if you look at the essentials, would say 4 years of training, this is an advanced status. That person would be classified as a beginner because they have not done those movements. So we've got to make sure that their training status and their experience are also being taken into account. Age and sex or gender, both may affect the athlete's experience, interest, and ability. Working with football at the Division I level, most of the athletes who came in had lifted before. They wanted to lift weights. They liked it. Having the women's soccer team as well. Over 12 years, I think I probably had a half a dozen girls who came in, ladies who came in with any significant training experience. So how we start the program with a football player and how we start the program with a women's soccer player have got to be completely different. So the athlete's experience, their training status, age, and gender can affect test performance. So these factors should be considered in test selection. Now, environmental factors such as temperature, humidity, and altitude can also influence test performances. So testers should try to standardize environmental conditions as much as possible. Let's think about this. We know that there's different surfaces for a 40-yard dash or a 60-yard dash or whatever the sprint test that you happen to do is. So if one day we test, let's say we do our pre-test on field turf or on AstroTurf, which is even denser and faster, we're going to have a very, very fast number. Then we decide, hey, man, it's 8 weeks later. It's nice outside. Man, let's go out to the field. Let's get on the grass. That'll be so nice. Let's try and run our sprint test out there. And all of a sudden, they're 0.2 of a second slower. Is it that your program didn't work? Or is it that that surface is that much slower? So you've got to test in the same conditions every time. If one day that I do my vertical jump, I do it on the field turf, which has got some give to it. And the other day, I do it on a concrete surface or on a wood basketball floor where I've got a great return of force from the ground that I put, or the energy that I put into the ground. The numbers are going to be different. Okay? It doesn't mean that you're better or worse that day. It means that your test conditions were off. So always make sure to test in the same way if possible. Now, I understand that there are going to be constraints on that with different facility issues, especially at the different levels. And you'll have team conflicts that you may not be able to do that. But try and do it as often as possible. I remember whenever I was much younger, I was in my early to mid-20s. Our soccer coach wanted to do the conditioning test, the beep test. He wanted to do it inside one day on the first day because it was cold. Then it got nice and warm, and we went out to the field, and everybody's numbers got a lot worse. Well, we went from an AstroTurf to grass. We went from no resistance to wind resistance, and the numbers got significantly worse on the post-test. Why was it? Was it because they were in worse shape? No. They had been killing the conditioning drills. We had the heart rate scores to show it. It was simply that they had a different environment. They had different surface, and they also had wind resistance. Make sure that you standardize that environment. Remove all extraneous variables. Find what matters. Go back to your needs analysis, only test that. Select exercises, drills that test what they need. Is it lower body strength? Squat them. Is it at a high level of aerobic conditioning? Are they a cross-country runner? Run them on the 2 mile. Do they need a high level of power? Look at the vertical jump, okay? Now that song is War Pigs by Black Sabbath, and I play this song in the middle of this presentation because it was something that happened to my sister back in the mid-'80s. We were living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It was my half-sister. She's 10 years older than me. And she came in to see a Black Sabbath show in Tulsa at whatever the name of the arena was. And if you know Tulsa, Oklahoma, it's the middle of the Bible Belt, and all the Baptists are always looking for something to protest. So they all came down, and they were protesting because of this sorcerers of deconstruction, witches at black masses, and all these other things. And they're protesting this band because this song is a satanic song. It's a devil-worshiping song. They're talking about black masses. They're talking about sorcerers. They're talking about all these other things. And guess what, guys? What is the song about? This is actually a war protest song, talking about how the people that are doing all these things and going out and having people killed have nothing to do with it other than greed and the desire for power and money, that there's a lot of other things that are going against it. So on the surface, it seemed like it was some evil song. But down deeper, man, when you get down to it, the protest was about a protest. If they would have looked and gone a little bit deeper, just as we can with the data that we already collect, there's a lot more than meets the eye. There's face value, and then there's deeper. What do the numbers mean? And more importantly, what can they mean? Now, there are tons of tests. We've got, mobility. We've got multiple ones. And guys, you know what? This is nowhere near an all-inclusive test. There are entire books that are like the physician's desk reference manual, about that thick, of different conditioning tests. This is nowhere near all-inclusive. But what do you test? And why do you test it? So let's look at mobility in a little bit more depth. There's been a lot of issues that people that have had with the functional movement screen. And I think some of the reasons are people are trying to look at it for something that it is not. What is it? It is 7 tests plus a couple of clearing tests that determine momentary movement quality. Okay? It may or may not be a factor in injury prediction. We've got to realize how dynamic injuries are, and I've got 2 slides showing that here momentarily. 14 seems to be a cutoff for non-contact injuries. But here's the deal, is that you've got to do the screen and do it right, and that's actually pretty tough. I thought I was really good at it until I got to be a professor in the Department of Physical Therapy and realized how much I wasn't seeing because I didn't have the training. And it's not an end-all, be-all test for injury or performance. People say how the FMS, it's not a performance test, so we shouldn't do it. Guys, the reason why I think it's a good thing to do is, 1, you get a common language to have with your athletic trainers, that you're like, hey, I don't know, what should this guy be doing? He had a 1 on this and he had a 3 on that, so it's a pretty good asymmetry. The AT will probably be like, hey, let me take him for a little bit. It's going to be good baseline discussion. It's not anything with performance. There's actually been only 1 study that found any correlation with performance, and that was an inverse correlation. It showed that the worse somebody was, it was a dual negative, I'm sorry, a dual negative. The worse somebody was on the deep squat, the worse they were on the standing long jump. That's also an indicator simply that the person has an inability to dorsiflex, which in and of itself is a major predictor of ACL injury. So that's something that we've got to take into account. If they're poor on the standing long jump, they're poor on the deep squat, probably ought to have an AT or a PT look at their ability to dorsiflex. Is it soft tissue? Is it a bony block? Is it a neural thing? What is the deal there? Okay? This is something I've talked about many times, so I'm just going to skip over it. Basically, talking about the injuries, they're very, very dynamic. There are so many factors that go into injuries. Anybody who looks at one specific topic and says that this is the only reason that people get hurt is a moron. There are so many things that affect the organism, it is unreal. This is simply academic stress, and training camp. So this was for the entire team. If you've seen Jan Lemure, I guess this one didn't have the pointer. You've seen this, this slide. Physical stress is training camp, high academic stress is exam periods, low academic stress. We see that during a low academic stress week, they don't get hurt much. High academic stress week, it's more. High physical stress week, it's even greater. But now let's look at something else. If we look at B, we see on B, this is the guys that actually played, right? We're looking at the guys on the 2 deep. If you look at the addition, if some people have hit me up on an email, it's like, hey, this doesn't add up. There's 46 that played, 51 that did not play. That's 97. How come there's 101 subjects? The other 4 were kickers. Where are we going to count the kickers? They don't put themselves in a position to get hurt during the game. And, you know, so we can't say that they did play. We can't say that they didn't play. So they played 6 snaps in a game, but that's all they had the ability to play. High physical stress to high academic stress, there was no difference. Okay, if we look at B, the HPA, so the test week in training camp, no difference. Training camp to normal school week, they were 2.84 times as likely to get hurt. Test week to normal week, they were 3.19 times as likely to get hurt. So we look here and we see from our data that they're actually more likely to get hurt from a pen than a 300-pound dude smashing them. So why do I even point that out? Guys, all stress matters. If you think that it's just mobility, if you think it's just hydration, if you think it's just strength, if you think it's just body composition, you're wrong. There are multiple things that affect the organism. So we've got to go deeper whenever we're looking at injury analysis. Now, what can it all mean? Let's go deeper into these specific tests. The vertical jump, the 40-yard dash, the pro agility, the 225, a squat and vertical, and a standing long jump, okay, in comparison with the vertical. So, the actual jump in inches or in centimeters is only a small portion of the information that we get from that test. We can gain much more information. There are things called power equations. These allow the practitioner to determine the amount, estimate the amount of power produced in watts for each player. How much power did they put out? So players change weight, they change positions, okay? So if somebody's gaining weight or losing weight and their vertical jump changes, did they actually improve in their ability to produce power or not? This is something that we've actually got to pay attention to. Now, we had an example of a player at the University of Missouri who was already there whenever I got there, told me he was recruited as a safety, and he ended up playing D tackle for us. He was a late maturer, so I'm not saying this happens for everybody. But in June of, that should be June of 01, he jumped 36 inches. August of 02, 35. August of 03, 33. August of 04, 32. August of 05, 31. So we see that his vertical jump decreased every single year. Now his position coach is on him. You're not working hard. Your vertical jump is going down. You're a less powerful player. You're hurting the team. You're hurting the team. Well, let's look at something else. What happened with his body weight? Well, in that June of 01, whenever he was still just coming out of high school, or still in high school, August of 02 is his freshman year. He weighed 180 pounds, he jumped 36 inches. What was his power? Well, if we use the Sayers equation, we see that it was 7,201 watts, which is pretty good, right? It's pretty good. He comes in, he puts on 35 pounds, he finds a place called Gumby's Pizza, right? Eating that every night, puts on 35 pounds. He's gone from safety to outside linebacker. His vertical jump went down an inch, but it went up 567 watts. I'm horrible at math, and my eyes are going on me, I guess. His vertical went down, his power went up, okay? So the next year rolls around. Gumby's Pizza is still, he's gone from the large to the extra large. He's gone from 215 to 255. He's gone from outside linebacker to inside linebacker to now defensive end. His vertical jump has gone down to 33 inches. Okay? His vertical jump went down another 2 inches, so we would think that he's less powerful because his vertical jump went down. Can't be, must be my training program. I'm not doing any better with producing power in my athletes. Well, shoot, he's put on another 500 watts, 8,283. August of 2004, he's moved into defensive tackle, only jumping 32 inches. So his vertical jump went down again, yet his power has gone up another 400 watts. August of 05, dude's looking like John Randall, weighing 305, only jumping 31. 9,004 watts. But coach, you know what? You're right. His vertical jump went down. He's so much more less powerful. He's only producing 2 kilowatts more than what he came in at. But coach, you know what? Maybe we ought to take what we've been looking at and go deeper and have a new frame of reference. Because what meets the eye and what you see when you go below the surface are 2 completely different things. Now, we're going to do a quick how-to for power. I know people are like, hey, I can't do that. That sounds great, but I can't do that. Guys, it's easy. Who in here collects data and puts it in Excel? That's a lot of hands. A lot of you in here who haven't been doing it, this is actually very, very quick and easy. This is from an actual profile that we use at the University of Missouri. And we're going to adapt this profile for the new desired data. So hopefully we can see this. That here we go. We see all of our tests across the top. We see player 1, player 2. I removed names. I don't even know who this is right now, so don't even try and ask me later. 35% body fat, that might be me. Shoot, I don't know. We go ahead and we throw in, we go here. All I do is I add in a new cell. And we can see at that top right now it says power Sayers. What's going to happen is I'm going to, this is actually row 870, which did not show up from the image, so I apologize. That means absolutely nothing for you. Row 870 denotes preseason 13 for player number 1. Column J is vertical height. Column D is body weight. So we just simply enter in the equation. So we'll have 60.7 times jump height in centimeters. So for us, that is J870 times 2.54, plus 45.4 times body weight in kilograms. Since we've got to convert it over to metric, we've got to use the body weight cell, which would be D870, divide that out by 2.2, and minus 2055. And that gives us a very accurate means of determining power. So that's what I did. Here we go. We put in that. We see that it's right there in that across from preseason 713. To fill in everything else, everything else, you just click on the corner, that right corner, drag it all the way down. Done. Now you'll see in here that there are some meaningless numbers. There's some really small ones, and there's some that say hashtag. I just said hashtag. Wow. Kate, I want you to slap me later. All right. Yeah. The pound sign, value, exclamation point. We also see that there's negative 2055. What this indicates is that there was no actual data in that. Something didn't make the equation work. Could it have been a word in there? Could it have been that there was no number because the person was injured? Yeah. So what do? You just delete that data and move on. So very small numbers most likely mean that one piece of info is missing. Simply delete it and save. Okay. So then we can see how has this person changed in the ability to produce power. Pretty nice and pretty simple. What else did you have to do? Spend about, 25 seconds doing an Excel formula. If you'd use it in a database format rather than this is what our coaches like to look at. If we would have gone with a database format where there wouldn't be spaces in between, you wouldn't have anything to delete except for bad data. You wouldn't have any of the negative 2055s. So, now let's go even deeper. Have they become more or less explosive? That's what we're looking at. Now, there's multiple power equations. I keep talking about the Sayers equation. Dude, he's a friend of mine. I've written several papers with him. His office is 3 doors down from me. If I didn't use his equation, that would really make me a pretty big, it's an appropriate word here. I promised Robin I wouldn't use any profanity. Pretty big a-hole. That's what that would make me. If you want to find more information from Sayers on his equation, that's the paper right there, okay? There's plenty of others. There's a Harmon equation. There is the Sargent. There's probably like 10 or 20 vertical jump equations. Use the one you want. I'm just going to go ahead and go with Sayers. Now, we can go deeper still on vert, okay? We can look at something called allometrically scaling. Now, allometrically scaling is basically a more accurate way to look at things as it relates to body weight, right? if you look at people of different sizes, somebody who's 6'2" and 5'2", you would be saying, by just simply dividing by body weight, that the skeletal mass was the same for each person, but that's not true. The taller and larger somebody is, the heavier their skeleton is, and it has to be to counter gravity. So the best way that's been found to take care of that is to use this thing called allometrically scaling. And all that is that we know from Bert Jacobson's work with Dr. Thompson, is that it's 0.66 to the 0.66 power, okay? So that's what that up arrow means, is it's an exponent. So we're putting it to the 0.66 power. And then that is going to allow us to see everybody on a relative scale. So what do? We go ahead, we look at our power, or our previously done profile, we add on another column, we call it allometric power. We enter our power, or we look at the power number that we took from the Sayers equation. Put that little caret up there, make it to 0.66. Bam, we've got our number. I'm just like Dr. Jeffries. I can't see a freaking thing. Is that small to you guys too? If so, I apologize. I can't tell what that number says. But 828? 328. I was like, dang, 828. Then I would have claimed it if it was 828. But we've got 328. That's how many watts per kilogram allometrically scaled that he's putting out. So then that allows us to look at everybody on that same factor to see who is actually most powerful pound for pound. It always would favor the lighter individual. This kind of makes it a little bit more even-keeled. Okay, again, how do we do it? We click and drag, delete non-usable rows. There we go. Okay, so then we got even more information just on vertical jump. So in just a couple of minutes, we have gotten so much more information. Do we know if this person, by gaining or losing weight, did they become more or less powerful? Before it was a guess, before all we were looking at was vertical jump. I made that mistake plenty of times, thinking that my offensive linemen were getting less and less powerful over the course of their career. But in fact, by just taking 30 seconds, we got so much more information out of it. So let's go standing long jump as well. We can actually utilize a power equation to get a fair estimate of power in watts for male athletes. I say fair. It's about a 500 watt error. But you know what? That's better than the equation that's not out there. Now, this is from myself, Mayhew, and Bird, done on athletes at the University of Missouri. It's not usable. It says not usable with females. Basically, what had happened is that I took our PT students. It worked great for the males because they were going hard, but the women trying to do a standing long jump. Okay, I jumped 18 inches, and they were having a negative power. So if you can probably use it. We're getting ready to publish an equation done with women's soccer players. So that hopefully will be out in the next couple of months that you would be able to use. So just keep your eyes open for that. But it works well for males, and if the females are going hard, it's an okay estimate just to see. It's just a measuring stick. I would call it bathroom scale theory. What do I mean by that? If I step on my bathroom scale, regardless of how close it is to what the doctor says, I would know that if I gained or lost weight because it reads the same way every day. So the bathroom scale theory would work for females, but it might not be that accurate. Admittedly, standing long jump takes some work. Okay, why is it going to take work? Because most of us go that number for the feet, an apostrophe, number for inches. Well, we've got to have it in metric system, guys, so I apologize. Some people don't want to do that. But you can use the text to columns to split that out, then just add it back in as inches, multiply by 2.54, then we've got our metric, and then we can throw it in there, okay? But if you're already doing two columns, just the feet and inches, you're set, okay? Now, let's go even deeper. Let's look at the vertical jump and the broad jump combined. Both test power. One tests it purely on the y-axis. The other tests it pretty much predominantly on the x-axis. The vertical jump is more hip extensor and plantar flexion dominant, where the broad jump is more knee extension and dorsiflexion dominant. To be able to project the force that way, I've got to have a greater amount of dorsiflexion to be able to get my body and my center of mass in a position to project in that direction. Both should be in agreement. If not, problems may arise. There are plenty of tests, plenty of studies that show that if you've got an inability to dorsiflex, you're going to have an increased risk of an ACL tear. Now, why would that be? If you're going to try and change direction quickly, what are we going to do? We're going to drop our center of mass. If it isn't able to happen at the ankle, where is it going to happen? It's going to happen at the knee to be able to drop that center of mass. If you project the tibia forward, your shin comes forward, that is a mechanism of ACL tear. If you project the tibia forward, it also puts into a weaker area for the hip to be able to control, so it internally rotates and adducts, okay? What are those also? Mechanism of ACL tear. So if we see that we've got that inability to dorsiflex, for whatever the reason, we know that we've got an increased risk of knee injury. So I'm sorry, I just went ahead and I talked about that without moving on. I'm horrible about that. If you've got a great vertical jump and a poor broad jump, we may be at a greater risk for hamstring and knee injuries because of that inability to dorsiflex. Now, I would love to be able to give you some hard numbers right now, but there are some issues with that, and it's the way that different people test. Some people test vertical jump off of a force plate. Some people do it off of a vert mat. Some people do it off of the just jump mat where they're landing like this. Some people do it off the just jump mat where they're landing like this in a low squat position. Whenever we're looking at flight time, that matters, right? So that's just going to, there's too many variables in the data to just say, hey, let's look at this ratio. I would take it and I would look at a Z-score for your own data. And whenever you see people that are way off, red flag it. Send them to the AT, send them to a PT, have dorsiflexion evaluated. There's never going to be equal. Why are they not going to be equal? Because you can produce far more power vertically than you can horizontally. One plane versus essentially one in an oblique. So 2 planes. I look at Z-scores and look at for outliers. Why are they outliers and what do they mean? Okay. I like that, and we'll talk about the Z-scores here in a minute. Now let's briefly talk about the 40-yard dash. The 40-yard dash, it originated with Paul Brown. It originated because Paul Brown's punter kicked on average 40 yards. So what was he looking for? Outside 2 guys, who's going to be my best ones to punt cover? By itself, what does that test tell us? Who would be the best to cover punts on Paul Brown's team? That's it. That's it. But we can go deeper with that data. And we can break it down to 10 time, 10 to 20, and 20 to 40. The 10 time is starting speed. 10 to 20 is the ability to accelerate. And the 20 to 40 is the top end speed. Now we can look at those times on their own, divide them by numbers to get meters per second or yards per second, and we can evaluate things to go into more on positional abilities. If we look at the offensive line of defensive tackles, the 40, completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. The 10, that's where the moneymaker is. We can look at this and know by their 40 time, what do we need to do to improve? If it's 10, you're basically looking at an absolute strength and the ability to overcome inertia rapidly from the start, from that starting position. For the 10 to 20, you're looking at acceleration ability. Things that tend to improve that the most, according to Bouchek's standard, he'll always tell you that you squat for your 10, you clean for your 20, everything else is sprint mechanics. Okay? So if they've got a great 10, a great 20, and they suck on the back half, work on the sprint form, work on the sprint technique. Maybe work on some overspeed things. You can use so it's a great test whenever we break things out more. We can get more information from it. If we look at it with the 5-10-5, and guys, you know what? I used an incorrect term. I said agility up here, and what we actually are talking about is change of direction. Agility has to do with the visual acuity and being able to pick up on the cue and make the cut based off of what you see going on and a game time decision of doing that. So what I'm actually talking about here is change of direction ability. So the 40 is speed, and we can go deeper with that. And the 5-10-5 shuttle is change of direction. So basically, well, even though it's only 20 yards, it should be about a quarter of a second faster than the 40. If it's less than a quarter second, it's telling us a poor ability to decelerate. The poor ability to decelerate could be from a couple of factors. It could be from the fact that maybe they can't get into position, so they have an inability, they've got a mobility issue somewhere. Or it could be that they are weak eccentrically. We've seen a couple of studies that came out of Sophia Nymphus and Tanya Spieri at Edith Cowan University, that they found that eccentric strength was one of the key components for change of direction. If they were weak eccentrically, they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it. They had that inability to absorb force. What is eccentric muscle action? It is the force absorption portion. We look at it in plyometrics, and we see that right there immediately, part of the stretch shortening cycle. If they have that inability, they can't do it. If they can't absorb it, they can't produce it. The 225 test. I know I'm running a little bit short on time, and I got a lot to get through. We're not going to get through all of it. So basically, it's not a strength test. It isn't. Look at my most recent paper for that, and look at the bridge video. I hate it for strength, unless somebody is weak. If they're under a 325 max, which some people are like, 325, that's a big max. Not at Division I football, not in the NFL. If they're below 325 for an offensive lineman, which is just ridiculous, it's like they can't do a push-up, it is a strength test. Okay, it is a strength test. 325 to 400 pound max, you're looking at 13 to 25 repetitions. Then you're looking at strength endurance. 26 to 33, it is strength speed endurance. And if you get over 500, it is speed strength endurance. Our study, looking over multiple years of data, found that if somebody got stronger and they were over a 330 max, that didn't matter. They're 225. It was completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. The only people that it mattered for were the weak ones. So that's something we got to think about and take into account and realize what you're trying to develop for people. If you've got to get the 225 test up, man, you got to do it. Right? You got to do it. If it's your job, you're training guys for the NFL Combine, doesn't matter if it's a stupid test, know what you're trying to develop, and you're going to get the best results out of it. So here's the chart that kind of goes along with it, just showing the percentage of 1RM repetitions, just going a little bit more in depth. So if we go look at vertical jump and squat, that gives us something that's a version, essentially an altered version of Zatsiorsky's explosive strength deficit. Vertical, we turn it into power. We already know how to do that. We divide it out by squat. I like using squat plus body weight. It gives you a total system load. Basically, what we can look at that is we can see if everything is in the right ratio, right? Is somebody strong? Is somebody explosive? How are they in relation to the two? If somebody's extremely explosive but weak, they're at a high risk of injury. If somebody is extremely strong but not explosive, they're at a high risk for sucking. And we can use this to alter training. We can see, do they need to get stronger? Do they need to get more explosive? Universal set standards, again, aren't a good idea. Why? Well, for every different style of offense, different style of defense, it's going to require a different style of athlete. Okay? And also, we have different vertical jump types. And let's be honest, with our squat testing, some people call this good, some people call this good, and some people make it happen where I've got a fake hip, I'm not going to get all the way down there, somebody's going to have to come get my ass up off the platform if that happens. Some people allow knee wraps, some people do multiple RM, some people do a 1 RM. All of these things are going to affect that. We're not going to ever be able to have a standardized number for this. And also, again, with the vertical jump, like we talked about before, is it a time measurement? Is it a force measurement? Is it a distance measurement? And how are you taking all the different numbers? So I'm still going to use Z-scores there. For conditioning, all right? A conditioning test, you can get your max heart rate from that, which you should. Instead of going 220 minus age. Some people are more fit, some people are less fit, some people just have a genetic predisposition to have a higher or lower heart rate. I found out from the NSCA in Vegas a couple years ago that I'm not a lucky individual. I would rather be right than lucky. My wife is very, very nervous about me going back to Vegas this summer for the NSCA National, which I'm going, but she might end up keeping the credit card. So I lost like $500 there in one night, and she's still pissed about that. We can also look at heart rate recovery from the conditioning test. How could we do that? We would just simply, if you're using a team system, drop the marker as soon as the test is over, and you're going to get your max heart rate right about there anyways, because that should be whenever the heart rate peaks, maybe 30 seconds or a minute later. Then we look at the heart rate at 1 and 2 minutes post. We're looking at heart rate recovery. What is that? That's just how quickly they recover after the test is over and how quick it comes down between repetitions. So it really depends on what you're using. For the 30-15, guys, don't even need to talk about it. Mick just talked about it, did a fantastic job. Max heart rate recovery, VO2 max estimate, max aerobic speed. That's my favorite conditioning test, and I love how he talked about it and some of the things he did with it. If you missed it, please pray to God that it's going to be on the website because it was a good one. Excel, some basic stats that we can do with Excel can tell us a lot more information. We can look at things like what was the average for the team, what was the standard deviation, and what was the Z-score. So how that person ranks in comparison with their team numbers. And this is going to be the most important part. And sometimes we'll see that it's not where the person is, but where they are for them. And we'll go over that here shortly. We're just going to kind of skip through this. This is the Z-score. Basically, it gives us a -3 to +3 number. And most of the people are going to be plus or minus 1. What do they need to improve? Whenever we're looking at the outliers, why are they there? What do we need to improve? Or is it where they are a bad thing? You know, we've had some athletes that were just complete freaks. We got them like 3 standard deviations away on power. Is that a bad thing? No, they're powerful. We want them there. Going deeper with the Z-scores, plus and minus 1, they're normal. If it's more positive or more negative than that, you've got, I wouldn't say issues, I chose a poor word there. You've got something to investigate. Why is it out of the norm? Is it a strength? Is it power? Is it flexibility? Is it conditioning, et cetera? So here's our bell curve that we should all probably remember from Stats 101 or algebra or something like that. But I wanted to jump here for this conditioning example. So whenever I started working with the athletes, we'll look here. Player number 5, which is the 4th one down. If you'll notice, second one from the bottom is the average. They are above the average on every single day. So what would that tell to us is that initially, without going any deeper, that this player must be always working harder. Well, I got news for you. It's not that. It's just how the person is wired. This person, I called her my hummingbird. She was about that tall, real tiny, and her heart rate was just always high. So to be able to go deeper and find more information, we standardized the scores for how the player was in relation to themselves. Okay, and this is where we get more information from. So if we look at player number 5 again, we can see that now what we need to do is look for plus or minus 1. When are they out of whack? And there's only one day, I believe, this 1/23/2015, whenever they were really out of whack. They were 1.31. There was only one day when it was actually hard for them. They only had one hard day where it appeared that every day was hard. They only had that one hard day on 1/23. Player 5 also had 2 days when they were easier than the rest of the team. However, on those 2 days, they were within a 3-trip score of the average. So they were a standard deviation below for them, but then when we looked at the average, they were right there with the team average. So we think that they're right where we need to be. What did that mean? On those days, they could have been slacking. They could have been slacking. So in conclusion, guys, there are tons of tests, and we didn't even scratch the surface on what we can do with using simple equations to garner more information. Test the same way every time, though. You want to test the same surface, the same environment. Guys, I remember a couple of different years with a conditioning test that we did for football. That one summer we did it, it was like 100 and some odd degrees at 6 in the morning, high humidity, 90, 100%. And guys that should have passed didn't. Why? Environmental conditions were horrible. There was other days that somebody must have done a rain dance and done some prayers to all sorts of different gods and had voodoo and everything else, and it was like 65 degrees and 30% humidity. There's guys I could have passed that day, all right? So you realize that those things matter. Test as consistently as possible. Squat depth, man, the pre and post, keep it standard. Don't have the pre be super deep and the post be a half squat. You don't know anything then. You don't get any information. Test what is being trained. So let's say this. If we've been in a period whenever all we've been doing is worrying about how fast we are, how fast we are, how fast we are, then you throw the conditioning test out there to see if they can pass it, what do you expect is going to happen? They're not going to pass. It's specific adaptations to impose demands. That governs the entire body. That governs all training. I don't care what your periodization style is. Use all of your available information and go deep. Okay, really quick, I'd like to thank Scott Caulfield and the NSCA. Man, if you guys have been going here for a while, you know that the past 5, 6 years, it's just been getting better and better every year. So, I'd like to just really point out how they've been working really hard on that. Mizzou Strength and Conditioning staffs for allowing me to still be involved in my current area, and Pat Ivey beforehand for giving me a shot. Rick Perry was my first boss, now with the Chicago Bears. Joe Kinn with the Carolina Panthers. I was an intern for him. Buddy Morris and Tom Zielinski are two guys that are on my speed dial that I greatly appreciate their friendship and I consider them mentors. Louis Simmons. Guys, love him or hate him, he's innovative. He will make you think. He will push the limits. He's been a great resource for me over the years. Cal Dietz, my brother from another mother. Dave Tate for what he's done with Elite FTS and giving me a platform to be able to get information out to you guys. Doctors Andy Fry, Bill Kramer, Mike and Meg Stone, Jerry Mayhew have all had a huge impact on my career. So I wanted to go ahead and thank them. Guys,